Pete's Christmas. A Canadian film released in 2013, Pete's Christmas was directed by nobody U.S. audiences would know and stars nobody that U.S. audiences would know aside from Bruce Dern, who plays the grandfather. The plot centers around an overlooked middle child who goes through like what Bill Murray did in Groundhog Day, or what Huey, Dewey, and Louie went through in Disney's Twice Upon a Christmas. Time loops over and over, presumably until Pete learns something. At 86 minutes, at least it's short for a feature-length film, and given that it's meant to be a family fantasy film and that it's Canadian, this really could go either way. Canadian films, especially family films, have a bad habit of going in very strange directions. Remember, I love Canada, from Red Green to Le Québécois and Hockey Night, and I'm still terrified of exactly how bad this film is going to be. Or is. I have to give the filmmakers some credit for having a real opening credit sequence, but they shoved in so much artificial decoration that I already feel nauseous while watching the opening. We're then given a weird sequence of lines with way too much exposition in the scene. Steadicam shot through the family room with Mom at the piano and the older boys wanting the song to be done, while the youngest son, Kenny, isn't singing either. When Pete points out the latter fact, the youngest says, "You're just displaying classic sibling rivalry." This kid is maybe 9 at the oldest. Should I point out how bizarre it is? And I guess because he wears glasses and talks like an adult, we're supposed to assume that he's an advanced learner for his age. Meanwhile, the eldest son, Jake, is holding a football and talks about going out with his friends. So he's an athlete. Which makes Pete the unremarkable one, sitting there reading a comic book. Then we're told that the mother is a veterinarian and has to tend to a sick parakeet. Parakeets don't have to be monitored that closely. You give them an injection or treat a wound and have an animal nurse keep it fed and watered. I think she must have a secret lover. That's the only explanation I have for a veterinarian leaving her family on Christmas to tend to a sick parakeet. On top of that, for the cherry on this introductory act, Pete's grandfather shows up unannounced and takes Kenny's bed, who then has to share a bed with Pete. Excuse me, but you have 2 sofas. Let the kid sleep on the sofa. Or better yet, have the eldest son sleep on the sofa. But no, Kenny is sleeping with Pete, and their mother says that Kenny won't wet the bed as long as he doesn't have anything to drink. And cue the little brother finishing a carton of milk. Cut to the setting for our film, a small town on a lake, with a railroad covered in snow, so it could be almost anywhere in Canada, Christmas morning. Pete is awoken by a model train. Kenny blames the pee in the bed on Pete, and Jake hits him in the head with a football. Or actually, I think it's a basketball, but anyway. Why hasn't Pete attempted suicide yet? I'm surprised that he bothers to speak up for himself with abuses like this. It's Christmas morning, and Jake gets a football and does a victory dance, then runs off to eat crumpets. In America, we call them English muffins. Kenny unwraps a telescope, which is what Pete wanted, but I guess the baby gets it instead, and it turns out that Pete gets nothing. The dad complains that he tried music, art, and martial arts, making him hard to shop for. People aren't that hard to shop for, but these parents neglect their middle child enough that I get the feeling Pete gets forgotten about a lot. After a small subplot is introduced about the grandmother's star that got broken, Jake hands Pete the last crumpet and wishes him a Merry Christmas. And you think, well, he's neglected by his parents and abused by his brothers, but at least they do love him. And then Jake quips that the crumpet had been dropped in the toilet. If I were Pete, then I would have developed an eating disorder or run away. Kenny even interrupts Pete and their dad talking, and Jake invites Kenny to play catch, but then Jake asks if he can play too and is just told no. Then his grandpa tells Pete that 1 year at Pete's age he got nothing for Christmas. Then he calls Pete Kenny. Pete does what I would have done and gets out of the house. But some twin boys who know him are waiting outside of his garage to barrage him with snowballs. He ducks around the corner of his house, but rips his pants on a piece of fence, and for no clear reason, a girl walking past sees him and screams at the sight of his boxered legs sticking through a giant tear in his pants. His parents stick them all in matching sweater coats and Santa hats to welcome the new neighbors. Pete and Grandpa don't want to sing, and who can blame him? His older brother hits him, and he sings loudly and off-key. That's great, Mom and Dad. Ignore familial abuse and force your children to do things they aren't good at. Then Jake wants to use his Xbox to play with one of his friends online, and although Pete tries to be responsible and unplug the lights so that the circuits don't get overloaded, Jake doesn't listen. Yanks a power cord, and the tree falls right on Pete, who rescues the telescope from getting broken. Kenny and Pete get into a tug-of-war with it, and Pete accidentally breaks the telescope. Jake lies and blames Pete for the tree falling on Pete, and Mom tells Pete to go to his room. Pete, pack your stuff, leave, and find a church or a youth shelter to stay in. At this point, I think that leaving without a note would be preferable, and the brothers wouldn't miss you. Hell, Grandpa could have your room, and Kenny would get his bedroom back. If you lock the door to your room, then you can get a good 48 hours before they'll break down the door. I wouldn't stay with abusive, neglectful people like this. The mom even says that it isn't like Pete to do any of what he gets blamed for. At a football game against this apparently large family called the Bronskys, Pete is targeted by the boys from before. He doesn't have possession of the ball when they slam into him on either side, and he collapses. Unconcerned for him, he lies there, still and lifeless in the snow. It's shown that he can't throw a football, and repeatedly gets abused by the Bronskys. This is charming. Our hero suffers more and more abuse. The special beef Wellington that the mother planned is left raw since the oven didn't get reset after the power went out when the tree fell. Jake continues the facade that it was Pete's fault after he already lost the game. Yeah, that's healthy. Pile more shame and self-loathing on the guy. So the family ends up going to a bar for burgers and fries. So there was nothing else to eat in the house that could be made quickly. Go to Tim Hortons for some sandwiches. Turns out that the dad lost his job. Grandpa says Dad should have gone to law school and bitches about the burger tasting lousy, and Jake and Kenny gang up on Pete, blaming him for their eating at the bar. The whole family gets food poisoning from the food, and Jake snatches Pete's deodorant spray. Grandpa decides to leave, and before he goes, gives Pete something Grandpa got from his uncle from the old country. And it's revealed to be an empty old jewelry box. And he wonders what's so special about an empty box, and even Grandpa admits that he doesn't know. We learned earlier that there will be a meteor shower that night. That's our astral magical connection. Pete wakes up and everything is happening over again. He thinks it's a cruel joke, but then he notices that the glass cabinet he broke got fixed. He lives through everything over again and is weirded out by everything happening again, exactly the same as before. He wakes up and it happens all over again. He goes to his room, and even without doing anything, the tree falls over and everything happens as before. The neighbor girl meets him when he manages to not rip his pants, and they actually make friends. He manages to not knock down the tree, only this time Grandpa's under it. So after talking with Grandpa, he decides to use his advanced knowledge to try and win the football game. Grandpa actually gives Pete kudos for not letting the Bronskys intimidate him, and tells him that underdogs can strike back. So a montage ensues set to a mock score of the hardest button to button by the White Stripes. Pete switches the tags on gifts so that Jake gets nothing, and Pete gets the telescope. He stockpiles snowballs to pelt the Bronskys, and sets Kenny up to have the tree fall on him. After watching Pete suffer some pretty arabesque and grotesque torture, yeah, I can deal with this. He tries to impress the neighbor girl and fixes dinner by ordering pizzas, so they don't get food poisoning. He does better at the game and practices his throw with Jake, learning all the moves he needs to make to win the game. He starts bonding with his grandpa a bit, and they join in pelting the Bronskys with snowballs. They walk around town, get pretzels, stick their tongues to light posts, make snow angels, and generally just have a good time. Grandpa and Pete have a great time because, as Grandpa puts it, they swapped stories and laughed. He learns more and more about Katie, the neighbor girl, and learns exactly how to charm her, in such a way as early adolescents can be idiotically charming to one another. He also learns that her dad died. He can't stop Grandpa from leaving at the end of the night, though, and his mom says that tomorrow's a new day, which just rubs in Pete's predicament. Pete goes alone on the same walk that he took with Grandpa and takes a look at a mural of a train. And I think we're supposed to take the metaphor that he's the engineer of this train. So he spends more time with Katie and starts practicing his guitar every day so that he can improve, and little by little, he does. He gets up early to make the family chicken and waffles. Pete then takes the family to a woman named Josephine's house for some reason, and although he bothers to bring his electric guitar and an arm amp, you can actually see that he isn't playing, even though you can hear it. Weird. Anyway, Josephine is thrilled since she's alone. It's hinted that this could be a new love interest since Grandpa is widowed. Anyway, Pete plays a more rock guitar-styled We Wish You a Merry Christmas for Katie and her mom, and they wonder when he learned to play the guitar. Pete brings a mascot to the football game and wins again, but this time Jake actually gets downhearted that Pete can suddenly play really well. And surprise, it turns out Jake was benched from the school team. So the next time he sets Jake up for a touchdown pass. He also finds some work for his dad as an advertising consultant. Pete finally thinks to reset the oven to save the beef Wellington, so sneaks down and learns how to make a sauce that will save the dish. He then thinks to invite Katie and her mom over for Christmas dinner. He plays Katie's father's favorite song, and it really warms the cockles of her heart. After finally having a heart-to-heart with Kenny, it turns out that Kenny feels pressured to be perfect all the time. Pete takes a look at how to try and replace the star that Grandma used to make every year. And in the normal denouement for a time loop story, Pete finally fixes things with Grandpa, and that Pete gets Pete out of his time loop. His family have a party for the whole neighborhood, and it turns out that the box is a music box, but it only plays when everything is set right, I guess. Actually, I have a box like the one in the movie. It's a cheap craft box. They sanded it, stained it, sealed it, and lined it with red velvet. I don't mind that they used a cheap enough prop box since it's just a plot device, but what stuns me is that they changed the song for the box to play in the end scene. That's just confusing. I think part of the reason that they named the character Katie is because the way that Bailey Madison, the actress who played her, was playing her was like a miniature Katie Holmes. It's actually disturbing, like she practiced in the mirror because she doesn't look like Holmes. It's just that the facial gestures make her look that way. Although she is about the same age as the actor playing Pete, she looks a bit younger. Peter DeCuna, who plays Kenny in this, was awful. But he's a child actor having to play this young kid who delivers awkward dialogue and has to impress people all the time. I feel bad for him because he's probably a nice enough kid, but he was just the best one to audition, I guess. I won't pretend like I could do better, as I suck without a million rehearsals. The rest of the cast is actually pretty decent. Nothing memorable except, of course, for Bruce Dern, who is a pretty good actor with a lot of credit to his roles. And this part has dignity and even some gravitas. For a different take on the Groundhog Day concept, I've seen this applied to a Christmas film before, and the whole premise has been used in shows like 7 Days, a short-lived sci-fi action show from UPN that the world has otherwise forgotten, but that actually had some good plots and a decent cast. But that whole show was about undoing a week's mistake or finding the culprit in time. However, unlike Groundhog Day, Pete's Christmas doesn't go as dark, with the former featuring multiple suicide attempts, lustful advances on naive young women, binging on food, and fruitless efforts to save a homeless man. Unfortunately, I think that Pete's Christmas is probably the most generic name that they could give it, but with a predictable plot, it's hard to come up with a good story title that wouldn't make it sound corny, even though it is. Pete's Christmas gets a 1.5 out of 5. The extra half from otherwise just having a 1 out of 5 is for the sheer volume of Bruce Dern you get in it. I'm not especially a fan of Bruce Dern, but I appreciate the man's work enough that in this film he actually comes forward and lends a decent part to it as part of the ensemble without taking the limelight.